He's doing a great job as well.
I don't know, Yomayra. I don't know if we can teach anything anything that will happen in the future to you.
It's
sorry to
happening
interrupt,
now.
but we're gonna be live in 15 seconds. Well, we are now live.
All right.
Okay. Well,
Give me just 1 second before we start formally. My colleague Vielky Álvarez, I'm looking for her now. Yes, here I got you. Vielky, you're officially co-host, so if you could help me admitting people in the meantime, because this is crazy, we're having such a good audience.
Yeah, I'll be helping you.
Two requests every 2 seconds, so let's see what we end tonight. So
Did we lose Anderson?
Yeah, I think so. It's kind of like a high-tech Agatha Christie novel where people just disappear, and you.
okay,
It's called Black Mirror.
And I was logged out right away. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight in this virtual round.
I shouldn't laugh.
well, Chris, that's technology,
Oh, I know. Trying to get a first grader to do classrooms online 4 times a day. I know.
Well, we are putting together different continents. He's in Spain right now.
Okay, let's try now. I don't know what's going on. Well, I would say thank you so much for joining us tonight in this virtual roundtable on relevant aspects of water law regulation. My name is Anderson Dirocie. I'm Secretary General of the Latin American Council of International and Comparative Law Scholars, Chapter Dominican Republic, and I will be moderating this roundtable with the support of my colleague, Ms. Vielky Álvarez. I will invite now our president, Mr. Ángel González, who will deliver the opening remarks of this.
Thank you very much, Anderson. Good evening, everyone. It is my distinct honor to welcome everybody to this roundtable in relevant aspects on water law regulation, which is being organized by the Latin American Council of International and Comparative Law Scholars, Chapter Dominican Republic, and Professor Ramón Lantigua, with the full support of the Tulane Institute on Water Resources Law and Policy and GreEnergy Dominicana S.R.L. Since its foundation in 2001, COLADIC-DR has had the purpose of studying, analyzing, and promoting international and comparative law in the Dominican Republic and the rest of the Latin American region, from an academic, multinational, and non-governmental perspective. As part of our agenda, our association has been in charge for nearly 20 years now of organizing different academic activities in which we do analyze from a point of view of comparative law, which are the best practices that have been adopted by other countries to influence the Dominican legal community and strengthen in the best way possible the Dominican legal institutions. This evening, we get together in this virtual roundtable adapted to our new normality to formally discuss several relevant aspects of water regulation and how they can be implemented in our country. Water is the most important element that Earth gives to all living beings. Around 70% of the Earth is completely covered with water. It is the main source of life. It is indispensable for all of us, human beings, as well as for all animals and plants. This resource plays a role of paramount importance in all of mankind's economic and social activities and largely contributes to the preservation of our environment. From the international community's point of view, a large number of commitments have been made among states to rationalize the use of water and protect the sources where we can obtain it. At least 2 out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that have been adopted by all member states of the United Nations and that shall be achieved by 2030 are directly linked with the subject of water, namely Goal number 6 clean water and sanitation, and goal 14, life below water. The United Nations has also declared the 2018-2028 decade as the International Decade for Action on Water for Sustainable Development. And to comply with the Paris Agreement on climate change, equal access to water and correct management of water resources will be especially relevant. From a local perspective, under Article 15 of the Constitution of the Dominican Republic, the state has the responsibility of promoting the creation and implementation of effective policies for the protection of our water resources. Although water regulation should be a priority in the agenda of the Dominican legislative authorities, the Dominican Congress has been debating for years a plethora of drafts of bills on water regulation and has not yet arrived at a definite consensus on the matter. This has left the Dominican Republic and its population to depend still on laws that were approved back in the mid-20th century and that do not relate to the opportunities and challenges that we currently have in 2020. Tonight, we gather intending to contribute with the academic and intellectual conversation regarding the importance of water law regulation in today's world, as the survival of the most living things in our planet depends on the preservation of water. From COLADIC-DR, we would like to thank Professors Mark Davis and Christopher Dalbom from the Tulane Institute on Water Resources Law and Policy for accepting our invitation to be part of this important dialogue. We hope to keep working with your institute and the rest of your team in future projects. We extend our thanks to Dr. Yomayra Martinó from GreEnergy Dominicana S.R.L, a member and constant supporter of COLADIC-DR's different activities, and from a personal perspective, a very dear friend. And Mr. Ramón Lantigua, our law professor and an expert on environmental regulation in our country, for being our partner since the very beginning with the organization of this roundtable. Finally, in the name of the Board of Directors, I would like to extend our gratitude for the support that we have received from the newly installed authorities of the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of the Dominican Republic in the person of its Vice Minister for International Cooperation, Ms. Milagros de Camps Herman, who is currently part of our audience, as well as the support that this dialogue has received from the first moment from our Deputy for the National District of the Dominican Republic, Congressman Jose Horacio Rodriguez, who is also part of our audience. In general, we thank you very much for showing your interest in being part of this roundtable and for your constant support to COLADIC-DR. We're currently live streaming this activity on our YouTube channel with the hopes of expanding the audience of tonight's dialogue. We sincerely hope that this meeting will be to your delight. Thank you very much. And now I will yield the floor to our Secretary General, Mr. Anderson Dirocie, and Ms. Vielky Álvarez, who will be our moderators for tonight's roundtable.
Thank you very much, Angel, for that comprehensive introduction, and welcome all again to this roundtable. Tonight, we are joined by 4 fantastic speakers who will share with us their perspectives on key issues regarding water law regulation. We share our speaker profiles in our social networks before, but I still want to introduce them very briefly. I will try so that the whole audience can know their background and experience in this field. I will start with Professor Mark Davis, who is the director of the Tulane Institute on Water Resources Law and Policy, as well as the director of the Tulane ByWater Institute, which is focused in the interdisciplinary aspects of water stewardship and community resilience. Professor Davis is widely consulted and quota authority on water law and management, and he lectures widely on water resources management. He is directly involved in helping Louisiana overhaul its long-term water planning and has testified frequently before the U.S. Congress on the need for a focused and effective commitment to the viability of coastal Louisiana and other vital natural treasures. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Professor Davis. I also have the honor to introduce Professor Yomayra Martinó, one of our own. She is the founder and lead consultant of GreEnergy Dominicana S.R.L, an agency dedicated to providing multidisciplinary advisory services and management of projects in the field of renewable energy, environment, and climate change. She has more than 13 years of experience as an independent consultant, during which she has served important national and international organizations. Professor Martinó holds a degree in law from the Universidad Iberoamericana in the Dominican Republic, and she holds a master's degree in policy, legislation, and environmental management, awarded jointly by the University Paulo Freire, University of Nicaragua, the Tulane University in the United States, the Rafael Landívar of Guatemala, and the Universidad Iberoamericana in the Dominican Republic. She has been a professor of law at various universities in the Dominican Republic and a visiting professor at Tulane University. She's, of course, a member of COLADIC Dominican Republic since 2002, just a year after our organization was founded. So she's a very dear member. Thank you so much, Professor Martinó, for joining us tonight. I now proceed to introduce Professor Christopher Dalbom, who is Assistant Director of the Tulane Institute on Water Resources Law and Policy. He is a leader in Louisiana water law and coastal adaptation. After graduating from Tulane Law School in 2012, he worked for 1 year as postgraduate fellow at the Tulane Institute on Water Resources Law and Policy before becoming the Institute's program manager and then assistant director. Professor Dalbom has done extensive work on legal and policy issues relating to interstate water compacts, comparative water law, Mississippi River management, the Restore Act, and other revenue streams associated with Deepwater Horizons disaster and coastal and water management. He currently leads Institute efforts to draft a comprehensive water code for Louisiana. Thank you for joining us, Professor Dalbom. Now, I introduce my dear professor, my own professor of legal English in law school, Ramón Lantigua, who is a practicing lawyer that has worked both with some of the main law firms in the Dominican Republic, but also served as legal director of different national and multinational companies in the sector of telecommunication, construction, and energy. Professor Lantigua holds a Master of Law specialized in environmental and energy regulation from Tulane University. As a law professor, he teaches courses on legal English, legal institution of common law, and legal ethics, both at graduate and undergraduate level in different universities in the Dominican Republic and at the Tulane University in the United States. He worked as a research assistant at the Tulane Institute on Water Resources Law and Policy. Welcome, Professor Lantigua, and thank you so much for your help in this initiative, putting all this together so we can have this roundtable tonight. I will explain now the dynamic of this roundtable. We will start with some opening questions to our speaker. I will give the questions, and any of the speaker will be able to address on someone else's answer. We will kindly ask you to keep your answer or comments within the 2 minutes at the most, and we expect to spend an average of 5 minutes per question. After initial questions, we will then pass to the interaction with the public. The audience will be able to write their questions and I will read them, or they will be able to raise hand using the raise hand option. I hope everyone can know how to use it. It was a little bit low for me, but I already got used to it. The raise hand option, or you can write on the chat and say that you want to use the microphone and we will let you use it. And now, before the very first question, I would like to give the floor to Professor Lantigua, who wants to start. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anderson, and appreciate the opportunity to have short words before we start. Previous to any consideration regarding water regulation, it is important to stress that the real meaning of the water resource lays further down from the repetitive statement that it is water which sustains life on the planet. Water is much more than that concept. That single natural resource is so dear to our life because it is tied to our best memories. It is present in our most valuable time shared with families and friends. And overall, it teaches resilience through a never-ending cycle which secure and sustain the life that we so greatly cherish and appreciate. I did not fully understood that meaning until I came across with the gentleman sharing this roundtable with us tonight. And through the experiences recounted in the stories of Professor Oliver Hauck, Tulane's David Bois Chair in Public Interest Law. As a kickoff of this journey, I will take a few seconds to read a short paragraph from a preface of Professor Hauck's book, Downstream Toward Home, a book of rivers. I have it here. I'm gonna read from the book. Professor Houck said, I am on a southern creek right now with my pots and pans. Some friends up on the sand bank are talking with low voices, but for the moment, I feel closer to what must be thousands of people around the country, indeed the planet, who at this very moment are on or by the water, or looking down at it from tall buildings, mesmerized by the flow. I want, after that reading, I want to personally thank my professor and supervisor at the Tulane Institute of Water Resource Law and Policy, and my mentor, Professor Mark Davis, to my dear friend, Professor Chris Dalbom, and to the one responsible of my journey to New Orleans, Dr. Yomayra Martinó, for the effort of taking time from their families and agendas to share their knowledge and experience with us tonight. I am sure that we will have a meaningful conversation, and more than regulation, we will have the opportunity to remember how important it is, the water in our memories.
Thank you very much, Professor, for those remarks. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of experiences shared together within this, between the speakers, but we will start with the questions now, and then if we have some time, you can maybe tell us about your experience in Tulane University. So we will start with our first question, and this is related to the importance of water. Is water an insufficient resource for the world's population's demand? Gonna be the first one.
Well, that is a short answer and a long answer. I don't know, maybe Professor Davis can, being the senior of the group, maybe he can help us there.
Well, well, I know what I'm being set up. So well played, sir. And you're right, there's a long and short answer. I think in the abstract, there's plenty of water. I mean, there's water everywhere you look. There's water underground, water in the atmosphere, water in the oceans and the streams. But that doesn't mean it's available and that it's clean and that it's affordable for people where they need it. And so I think that's really, the challenge that water law is supposed to help address. Water law did not emerge as a doctrine of environmental law or even social justice. It was designed to determine who could use water, when, where, why. And for the most part, it preferred people with power and property. But as you note, everybody needs it. And that's what makes water special, because no matter what you do with it, you really have to find a way of allowing every living creature on Earth to have enough to survive, because we're all we are interconnected. So the short, the scientists that I talk to, they say there's, all the water we have now, it's all the water we've ever had, and it's all the water we ever will. But that doesn't mean that it's where you need it, where I need it, or certainly, that it's available on terms that anyone should be, proud of.
Professor Martinó, do you have something to add? I cannot see you, like you want to jump in. I'm gonna be teasing you like that, people.
Okay.
Anderson, it seems that you know me really well. Well, that will happen in the whole session. First of all, let me thank you all for having me here. I'm the apprentice of this gentleman here, which I'm honored to be their friend and their colleague. And thank you so much, COLADIC, for being part of my career. It's been developed through COLADIC, so thank you very much. It's truly an honor. Well, I'm pretty much agree with what Professor Davis has said about the double perception that there is plenty water, but you cannot have universal access to that water. And it means a lot from the territorial development approach, which is what I want to bring to the table. In terms of development, as we love to talk, especially sustainable development, there is no way that we can grow. There is no way that we can supply all the needs established in the Sustainable Development Goals, but also in our own strategy, national strategy of development, which is a law as well. So there's no way to accomplish that without water. You have presidential goals related to increase the tourism. You have right now, the recovery answer to COVID-19 related to water. Wash your hands, right? You have the energy nexus, you have the agriculture nexus, and all that is pretty much impossible without the guarantee of a restructure of the law, water law, but also the institutional framework that we have right now, which is in a serious overlapping process. And we are in an emergency related water because we also need to consider the challenge, which is the correct answer to adaptation to water security related to climate change. So, for example, for the case of the Dominican Republic, we have two projections of future climate. One is to 2050, which is the decrease of precipitation in 15%. And to the 2070, you have the decrease of 17% of that precipitation. That means that we need urgently to have an answer to that question, and a straight and clear answer to the universal access.
Thank you. Well, talking about the importance, and at the same time, the importance of the regulation, that leads to the second question, which is maybe the most general and also key question of this roundtable. And it is this one: which are the most important considerations in water regulation? And I hope everyone will jump in on this one. Professor Dalbom.
Yeah, I'll start. Council, I'm also deeply honored to be here. In terms of what is most important in water regulation, I mean, I think water regulation is, whatever it is, whatever it does, it's going to reflect the values of the people who are creating it. And if they value equity, it will reflect equity. If they value exploitation, it will reflect exploitation. If they value science and good sense, it will value science and good sense. But as Professor Davis kind of referenced earlier, usually what is valued is power. And so having that in mind, sort of the purpose of the regulation and being honest and clear about what those purposes are is the first step. The second step, I would say, is that, you know, good regulation, good or bad, works 90% of the time. It's when it's at the extremes, it's at the hard times when you find out if your regulation scheme is good or not, if it works. If there's too much water, if there's not enough water, if it's in the wrong place, if there's conflict over the water, then you find out if your water regulation works, you know. And so what is effective water regulation? You know, it is a water regulation system that works 100% of the time, not 90% of the time.
I will add, Chris, maybe, you know, in order for water regulation to be, I mean, some things to consider about water regulation would be like never forgetting what you do with the regulation. Actually, you know, you have to stay tied to considering that water should always serve the public interest, you know, and maybe, I don't know, maybe no treating the water as a commodity at all, and having and being able to be flexible in order to adapt to the necessities of the community, which is the final end of serving water.
I agree.
Well, since you wanted everyone to chime in, I'll throw in. I'll throw in real fast, and I think that, any water regulation, comes down to three basic things. One is it rooted in reality? Is it grounded in justice? And is it flexible? Most of the water laws that I deal with, and I think this is probably true with the Dominican Republic, we all inherited legal traditions from Europe, but we don't look like Europe. We brought in water laws to the United States, and part of the United States had giant rivers and giant lakes. They don't have those in Europe. We have deserts. They don't have those in the same way in Europe. And so, and we pretended that groundwater doesn't matter. It matters a great deal. And so there was a disconnect between law and the realities of water and the development of human society and the needs for the environment. And justice, I think that even though it's true that water law has always been driven by those with access to power, it's also been imbued with a public interest. It's most flowing waters and navigable waters are considered to be public things, which means you cannot absolutely privatize them, which is a surprise to some people who think they've accomplished that. And that any private rights you create have to be reasonable, and that shifts, and that's why flexibility is so important. I think you indicated, it was indicated earlier that the Dominican Republic is dealing with water laws that were developed in the mid-20th century. Well, that's not who we are. It's not where we are. If you don't have the ability to adapt, then you end up essentially playing a game with an old rule book. And so those three things, reality, justice, and flexibility are the ones that I always keep coming back to.
Thank you. Professor Martinó?
After Professor Davis, you have nothing else to add, but definitely beyond being flexible, I will just suggest that flexible includes what is to harmonize the regulation. In our culture, we have all kinds of instruments and very broad in their scope. So maybe beyond flexible, to harmonize and be coherent with the spirit of the law.
Thank you.
I would like to add, following on Yomayra, we tend to have different regulations for the same thing. Like a lot of regulation regarding water disperse, and sometimes we don't have a coherent body to rule the situation, and then that's when we get in trouble. And I think that we should, at least in our case in the Dominican Republic, we should be able to work better on that in the future and be able to bring a coherent body of regulation to be able to advance in some way.
I think you're right. That makes sense, because water touches everything, right? As we talked about at the beginning. And so as law develops, as new things come under new laws, water is always going to be affected. And you're right, we don't think about it as a whole, as a cohesive usually. And I think that's where we get back to the flexibility that Mark was talking about, and being able to adapt that water system to everything, because it is going to be affected by everything.
Yeah, I think a point that Professor Lantigua is making in the case of the Dominican Republic is that when we have this dispersed legislation and disposition about water, it's not that we are actually being flexible, but it's more that we don't have a comprehensive policy on water. And of course, if you'll have a comprehensive policy and then you will change in different legislation, it will kind of make sense. But as our president said, we have like a very old legislation on water right now. And I think the next question is very important for our authorities with us tonight. And it is, what is exactly the role of water management in today's regulatory scheme?
Repeat that, Ed?
Again, what is the role of water management in today's regulatory scheme?
Well, go ahead, Ramon. I want, yeah.
No. By all means, Professor.
Oh.
I'm here seated in your classroom now.
And this is where the Socratic method works. And I say, Mr. Lantigua. So, okay. I'll take the first cut, but only with the understanding that others will then correct it. I think it's important to understand that you can have a regulatory regime, and Chris kind of noted this before, and which is, having a regulatory regime doesn't mean you have a management regime. It just means you have a regulatory regime. It doesn't necessarily mean you're managing water for any particular purpose. I mean, keep in mind that first of all, there is no one thing called water law. It's all these things that I think all the speakers have spoken to, which is water law is covered by various pieces of law, whether it's environmental law, energy law, transportation law, food law, all sorts of things, and it all comes together around the control of water. But you have to ask, what are you managing water for? And so that's when you really decide whether or not your regulatory regime is getting you someplace you want it to go. I mean, both Ramon and Yomayra have spent time here in New Orleans, and one of the things that Chris and I work on is that we're trying to keep our the lower third of our state from disappearing into the Gulf of Mexico, and that's because we made it do that. We disconnected the rivers and we carved up the marshes and swamps. And we did it for a dozen reasons, some of which were really good at the time, but they weren't really about managing water. They were about managing the extraction of something. They were about, at one point, avoiding German submarines, all sorts of things. And that's, to me, is where you can have extensive regulation and not very effective management. And that's one of the dangers I think we've certainly seen as we've looked at water law, as it works around the United States and around the planet. Some places have not much water law and not much management. Some places have lots of water law and still not much management. They have lots of lawyers and they have lots of people, working, but they're not necessarily improving the sustainability and I guess, really the management of the resource as a whole. And so I find that to be one of the biggest challenges. And I think, and once you start to regulate, it gets hard. That's where the flexibility comes in. It gets hard to undo it or to modify it.
Yeah, and I think
sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think this question also points at the difference between law and policy and management and planning. One of the things that was mentioned there in the bio is that we're working on a comprehensive water code for the state of Louisiana. And one of the things that people ask us about it is whether or not we are writing a water plan for Louisiana. And we say absolutely not. We're the last people who you want writing water plans. We are not hydrologists. We are not engineers. We are not managers from water and utilities, or we're not agricultural economists. We're none of these things. The type of people that you would want planning for the water use in your country, your state, your region. But without the regulation, without the law and policy, there's no structure for that to happen. You know, and so one of the things we say is, no, we would absolutely not be writing a water plan for the state. However, we will be writing the statute that creates the duty to write water plan for the state. You know, and that's the difference. That's the work that we do versus the work that you know, water managers and water planners do.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, you know, I understand. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you correct me, but I think that we are so lucky in this side of the world that we have so much water visible that we understand that we don't have to do any efficient management of it. And we understood that so long that now, you know, we're having trouble. And we woke up from, you know, from, oh, well, you know, we've been doing so many wrong things. We haven't been managing a resource that we take for granted. And now we know that we're going to have trouble.
I think that's exactly right. We share that, which is Louisiana, in any way, was considered so water rich that who needs to manage it? You need to manage for floods and those acute things, but you don't manage water. It's always there. You know, yeah. Kind of reminds me of certain people I know who inherited money. You know, there was always money. They assumed there'd always be money. So they forgot to take care of it. And then one day there was no money. So I think that, you know, this is in many ways our inheritance, and we, you know, what we do with it, you know, determines what we, you know, pass on to the next generation.
And talking about money, Professor, is currently one of our challenges because the new management that they just assumed the past month, they are requiring more budgets in order to perform what is in the national strategy law. So definitely money is part of the challenges of the management of water.
Well, you're spot on, Yomayra. But I think the budget that matters most is what's your water budget? And that's the one that you often don't see. So how much water do you have? How much do you need? Who needs it? And how much do those natural systems and the future, how much are they going to need? Again, all the money in the world won't buy you that, you know, if you lose it. And that, I think, is it's one of the things Chris and I, you know, work on in this water code stuff. It's, you know, it'd be easy to write a water code. Gee, you know, we could do that in a week probably at this stage, but it wouldn't make sense. We don't, you know, you have to know why you need to manage water. And the other thing we're seeing is that, you know, if you won't manage your water, if you won't figure what its value is, someone else will do it for you, and you won't like the answers. I mean, that's why I think, you know, no one will put I guess, will value your water and your natural heritage more than you do. And so, and that is, I think, if there's one lesson that we can really, you know, teach from Louisiana anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Our next question is, what is the role of new technologies in water regulation? I will say water management as well.
You know, technologies are changing what's possible all the time. But probably they're also potentially exacerbating the divide between the haves and the have-nots. If you've got not a lot of water, certainly not a lot of fresh water, but plenty of money, you can invest in desalinization and things like that. And desalinization has been around for decades. The technology is still improving even today. But if doing that means that there's plenty of water, but only for those who can afford it, then, you know, that's a problem. That's a real danger with the technology, you know, leading in a lot of places for their water management and their water regulation.
Thank you. Professor Martinó, I see you moving.
You are quite brilliant. Well, definitely technology is one of the things that we are needing right now in terms of comply with the real need of the stakeholders of the water regulation. For example, right now we're shaping a new sustainable production pattern, and we're shaping it through circular economy. So we need to promote the inclusion of new technology that helps the private sector, the industrial sector, to treat better their wastewater, for example. And we need to clarify the importance to reuse those types of wastewater that are able in terms of the chemical value, the physical value, and biological values, of course. There is certain technical resolutions of the Minister of Environment that needs certain adjustment in order to clarify concepts, but also maybe to be in the same path of this circular economy that we are preaching all over in the public, but also private sector. So circular economy depends on technology, and right now we are in the path to require that technology for the case of the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, you're 100% right. That's a great point. Circular economy works to reduce waste. And one of the ways you can reduce waste is by improving the technology and the monitoring and all of that things around the water use and the water flow and things like that. And you know, so much power that's in Silicon Valley right now is because they know how to use data and they use it really, really well. And in the water sector, and especially in places like Louisiana and the Dominican Republic, where, as Ramon said, we just kind of take water for granted, we're really data poor with our water. And so we can't use that until we start to have that data and start to gather that data. And again, that's where the technology and some of this stuff comes in. And you're right, it's not just like, oh, desalination, but it's all sorts of stuff like you're saying that can help lead us to circular economy and to reducing waste.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, I think it's always important to remember that, you know, technology is a tool, it's not the task. You know, you need to ask what you're asking your technology to help you do. But it's not the answer. It's a piece of, you know, implementing answers.
Thank you very much. Well, I know
I would like to add something, Anderson. Sorry about that.
Welcome back.
You know, with this, we tend to realize that new technologies are something, you know, so fancy and so scientific. With water, I like to go to the roots, you know, and maybe go to the communities. It's so simple as, you know, sometimes new technology, thinking about something very simple like sanitary facilities. You know, sometimes we don't think about it, and just you know, by modifying the way in which we use the water in the very basics of our day-to-day life, we make a huge difference. So you know, it's just that application of technology. Maybe give the opportunity to the communities to develop new technology to be implemented in their day-to-day, and that could be something that you could achieve through regulation to facilitate resources and facilitate opportunities for the communities to empower themselves in the process.
Thank you very much. Well, I think this next question is connected to some of the questions that I've received in the chat. And it is, what do we need to take into consideration in a water law in the Dominican Republic, given its particular condition as a Caribbean island? I will say half of a Caribbean island.
Well, I don't know, Yomayra, do you feel? I'm being a gentleman here because we are the Dominicans, so I'm just.
No, it's not gentleman. That's tigueraje in Dominican. You know it. Well, actually, we just mentioned we need a regulation coherent with the times that we're living. We need to promote all that transition that we have been talking, but also the roots, as Ramon say, we have in the national strategy law a goal and an indicador, how you say that I forgot. Un indicador. Yeah, which is the total percent, 100% of the universal access to water, but also to sanitary infrastructure to 2020. So that's one of the goals that we are definitely not compliant at all. We are in default. So when you are promoting a new regulation that has been going back and forward for more than 12 years, which is my whole career, you definitely need to have a surveillance more close of what is being discussed in the Congress and what you're gonna get at the end of this process. So you also need to be more able to have monitoring process, transparency, and verification of the data. As Chris brilliant suggests, data is the baseline to do more of the transformation that you are required in the water sector. But definitely we need to be more dynamic in the regulation, even though we have the law already in discussion, again, the same project.
I think at least one of the projects, one of the two that are in the Congress right now, I see them since 2013. I went through, I mean, even before that, I went through, I remember I went through the classes at Tulane, and I was working at the center, and we were talking about this regulation. I don't know if you remember, Professor Davis and Chris, but that was one of my assignments, actually, to look at it, at the regulation, and it's still being right there, you know, still being right there. So if you feel you can hire me again, so I can talk to you again about that same regulation. Now I know a little more. I think that, I don't know, maybe at this point, we need to pay special attention to the balance in between management and economic growth right now. I mean, if I have to point out certain regulatory issues to take in consideration in our scheme right now, I will say that balancing water management and economic growth, securing social well-being, probably maybe considering privatization not as a solution to everything. It is not the devil, but it's not the solution to everything either. So we have to kind of balance that, and maybe promoting investments, and you know, coming out with ideas to promote investment and promote growth. It can be done. We just have to sit and think a little more, you know, about what we put in these regulations.
Thank you very much. Well, the next question is related to this idea that we have water and we regulate water in different ways throughout different legislation. But when Professor Ramón Lantigua talks to me about water law regulation, I was thinking about, yeah, but what's the scope of an actual effective bill? Like, are you regulating consumption? Are you regulating access to actual resources? What are you regulating exactly? So I propose this question, which is, what is the usual scope of an effective water law regulation? What should we actually regulate, and where should we be a little bit more flexible?
Chris, this sounds like a question for you.
I think so. You know, I think, I mean, if you look at the European Union, if you look at the countries over there, effective water regulation really touches everything. There and some other places like, I believe Malaysia, you know, they've taken on integrated river basin management as how they manage water. And integrated river basin management is not just how much water is there and you know, how it can be used, but it really touches land use and every other activity and economic growth and all of these things. And it's organized around the river basin. It's organized around the way the water organizes. And it's amazing, revolutionary stuff if you're sitting somewhere like here where we don't think of it in that way whatsoever. So, so effective water regulation can really touch all of these things. But you know, then you're just sort of into your management scheme. You're into, like Yomayra said, you're into money to fund the agency that's going to be in charge of this. You know, you're into making sure that it's not captured by you know, specific interests in certain places. So, you know, what it can do effectively is it can regulate a lot of these things, but just because it regulates a lot of these things doesn't mean it's effective.
Okay.
Yeah, I would second that. In fact, you know, I thought it was a trick question because it said, what is the usual scope of effective water regulation? And I don't see that there's anything usual about effective water regulation. It tends to be the exception rather than the rule. And I think, and that's because, you know, we built water regulation piece by piece over time. And it wasn't meant to be, you know, to work together. And I think, as you know, as Chris was noting, you know, whatever successes the European Union has to offer, you know, the way they're handling some of their environmental and water, you know, issues is actually quite encouraging. I mean, especially since we're writing a water code and we're from a civil law jurisdiction like you are. You know, we thought, well, how did the French, what are they doing these days? What are the Spanish doing these days? What are other places that share those legal traditions doing? And we find out that they're not doing it the way we are. You know, we're still, you know, sitting with, you know, 19th century laws in many ways, you know, governing our decisions. And so, you know, since we are the inheritors of European legal traditions, you know, it seems like we should be willing to learn, you know, from their next generation. You know, we've become more curators of European doctrine as opposed to students of it. And I think that has been, you know, one of the more interesting, you know, things we've learned. So, but I do think, you know, when I look at effective regulation, I look at what is its purpose and, you know, over what time are you trying to plan? And in fact, in many ways, I like to think, you know, where do you want to be 50 years from now? And do you have, you know, and do you have the laws and policies and programs that can get you there? Because if you don't, then you have to find them or change your expectations.
Thank you.
Well, I believe, you know, that at the end, I don't know, Professor, what you want to achieve is to be sustainable. I think at the end, you know, like with the regulation, you wanna aim to that end. I don't know, in our case in the Dominican Republic, the scope, I think it goes everywhere now because we have to revise. We have to go through a process of revising, reviewing what is going on, what we have been doing up until now. Just an example, you know, we're not paying attention to underground waters, and we see people, you know, somehow making private the underground waters. I mean, people buying pieces of land just to where they can survey that they have underground water available right there, and they want to keep the underground water private up until there. So that's just one case, but we don't, as a legal, with our legal background, we don't know what to do with underground water right now, you know? So we tend to tie the issue to the land. And I think that we have to pay a little more close attention to that.
Well, that's the traditional way of doing it, where you view that everything under your feet belongs as part of the land. And that may have made sense 100 years ago before we actually knew how groundwater worked. If I have one modest suggestion, because this is what we're working on in Louisiana and what we have seen elsewhere, is that all water should be a public thing. And any private rights created in it must still be subject to an overriding public interest. So even when you create private rights, like if I drop a well on my property and I start taking water, it doesn't mean I can take all the water. It doesn't mean I can drain my neighbor's wells. It doesn't mean any of those things. It just means I have a preference, but I do not have a right to exploit to the extent that it is not sustainable. And again, what do we even mean by sustainable? Some aquifers will never recharge. It doesn't mean you shouldn't use them, but you shouldn't build your future on essentially a mine that will one day close. And that's one of the problems with groundwater, is that legal doctrines assumed that somehow it was either unknowable or inexhaustible. Neither is true.
You know what? Let me pull a couple of things that have been said so far together, because this is what came into my mind when you were asking about the future of water regulation in the Dominican Republic. And it ties up to what Yomayra was saying about the precipitation is forecast to decrease over the next 50 years. I am willing to bet also the precipitation that you're going to get, just like here, is going to be in bigger events. More of it, even if you've got 30% less rain, you might get rain on 50% fewer days because you're just going to have more rain and big storms and stuff like that. So I would think about groundwater. I would think about how do you improve, you know, penetration of those rains, of those big rains. How do you get that into the ground to store it, to save it, so that it doesn't just immediately run off into the Caribbean? I think that's, I mean, if I were, you know, a scientist, this is what I'd be working on, engineer, that's what I'd be working on, is how to use that, how to save that. And I don't think the answer is necessarily great big giant dams and big reservoirs. We've seen how easily those fail. And especially if you're in somewhere where you are having like flash, you know, floods, giant rain events and stuff like that, there's got to be a different way to do it. And so I think that's another thing as far as long-term, especially in somewhere like the Dominican Republic. And if your legal scheme doesn't allow you to do that, because if people are just claiming groundwater as their own, well, then your legal scheme has to change.
And the legal schemes that you have with Haiti may also have to be related.
Oh yeah.
When you share resources, at some point you need to share. You know, there has to be some shared governance.
Yeah.
Architecture.
Does the Dominican have any sort of water-related treaties with Haiti? If not, you need some.
Yes. I mean, we have to work on that. Definitely, it is a task, a pending task, and a very important one. But it is very sensitive because you know, basically due to the situation, it is a whole different situation right now in between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and it is but yes.
Yeah. No, I mean, I always think of groundwater and aquifers as kind of like a sponge, and you know, if you can double the size of your sponge, that's a helpful thing.
And again, you're not unique in that way. I mean, we have those issues with other states in the United States. When we look at what's going on the Nile, you look at what's going on in the Mekong, you realize transboundary water management is an increasingly important thing. Because,
yes,
you know,
I think that you have even a more complicated situation because you have the issues with the states, and also you have the issues with different countries. I know that you have some treaty with Mexico, right, and also with Canada. So you have sometimes you have your. I mean, it is a more difficult task. Here we only have one border, so should be easier, but somehow, you know, it turned into something unachievable.
Well,
We actually had a question on specifically on that, how to avoid transboundary water conflicts with the best way to address them. I mean, you want to point it out, but I guess we already have the idea of having a treaty for starters. But if you have any other recommendations, please go ahead.
I think one of the lessons we've definitely learned from the interstate compacts and with our treaties with Mexico is, don't use hard numbers because the numbers change. The number of acre feet or cubic gallons or whatever in a river or in a system at the time that you draw up a treaty is not going to be the number that there is in the future. So you got to work on stuff like percentages and things like that. You can't use hard numbers. When states have entered into contracts like that between states in the United, that's when they really get into trouble. Is when they're stuck with these numbers that are just completely irrelevant to the actual situation on the ground or in the stream.
And I would also suggest trying to see if you can start sharing data and agreeing on what is good data. When everybody has their own version of facts, it's hard to have a discussion. And none of this is easy. And I mean, and finding ways of enforcing, that's really tough. But you also have certain shared destiny issues. And that's the other piece you should always keep in mind.
Yes.
And that sooner or later, the destinies of Dominican Republic and Haiti are going to be the same. And so those, reminding yourself of those things, I think doesn't make it easy, but it does make it more possible. And Chris is dead right. I mean, the number of things that we have seen where they plug in an absolute number and say, that's what we're managing for. And that's when I mentioned earlier, you have to be rooted in reality. When reality is something that happens way outside of your numbers, which we see like on the Colorado River every day, where they assumed there was a whole lot more water than there is. And they forgot that Mexico existed. And they forgot that Native American tribes not only have moral rights, they have legal rights under various treaties. They forgot all of those things. And now, not only that, they're looking at less water to begin with because of climate change. Mm-hmm. So Chris is, I think, dead on. Having an approach to a water budget and how and uses is important. But once you have to have that flexibility built in, and that has to, I think, include all of the relevant stakeholders, even if they're not easy to corral.
Thank you very much. Well, I have my last question for my opening questions, just teasing the people here before we give space for their questions. And this is regarding government jurisdiction. When talking about government jurisdiction regarding water law regulation and water management, should there be some deference regarding specific elements to local government, like city council, or should it all be focused on the national government, or in the case of the United States, maybe state or federal government?
Well, in the current law project, which is in the Congress, since I started learning about water law, they suggest a zonification, classification of the uses through risk and stakeholders. And part of that zonification respond to the main idea that I shared earlier tonight, which are territorial development. If we follow the Constitution and if we follow the national strategy, we see the region as the unit we use to design public policy. And considering water part of this development, we should start seeing the regions as part of that zonification or as part of that classification of the governance. But that governance needs to answer to the traditional administrative law rule, which is there need to be a hierarchy, they need to accomplish, they need to be coherent with the national public administration. So even though if you rely on the local government to certain permits as the land use, for example, you also need to ensure that the criteria to those permits are in the same line that the national administration and the national governance.
Yeah. So it is true in that case, Yomayra, and they are suggesting the constitution of a new authority also to manage the whole system. If I remind, it is called something like ANAGUA, and that's what they're suggesting as the regulator of the whole system. But it's it's like it's at a national level, Anderson.
Yeah, I think, I think I told you earlier, Anderson, that, I work with 3 rules. One is that, that, governance works best when it's closest to those it's serving, but it still has to have the adequate authority and resources. So asking a town of 10 people to do this is more than you can ask them to do in all likelihood. But water is also managed best comprehensively. So that means regionally or even nationally, for some kind of oversight. And then my rule number 3 is that rules number 1 and rules number 2 don't always fit together. And I think that we see that, there are certain types of water management that are best handled, as close to the, to the people as possible. And those are the ones that have to do with delivery, have to do with waste treatment, have to do with, I think, just the overall distribution and use. But to avoid the problem of one community, essentially prejudicing the next downstream community, you need somebody who can, I think, supervise the overall public interest in the water itself. And that's normally the state or the sovereign. And that's where I always go back to, if there's one thing we inherited, in our legal traditions that I'm glad of, it is that, the ultimate responsibility, and it is a legal responsibility, even though they don't always acknowledge it. The sovereign has a duty to look out for the public interest in water. And that they have to be reminded of that continually. But that is a trust responsibility. And even sometimes I have seen laws passed that turned out to be illegal laws because they were not consistent with that trust responsibility. And that's actually how I got into water law. I was involved in a case where somebody tried to give away a big chunk of one of our Great Lakes. And it turns out it didn't matter that the legislature and the governor of the state said it was okay. They did not have that power. That was really informative to me. And so I think, trying to line up the responsibilities with the level of governance is key. And I don't think you can do it from just a high altitude, but we all know that purely local is probably more than you can, it's a bigger burden than they can handle alone. It has to be, I guess it has to be integrated in some way.
Thank you very much, Professor Davis. Well, now we start with the interactive part with the questions.
All right.
I'm gonna read some of them, but please, everyone, I know there are some experts and people curious about this topic. So if you would like to use the microphone, you can raise your hand through the app or just text and say, hey, I want to say a comment or ask myself this question because I don't want to hear you anymore. Well, we have the first one. This is, what do you think should be reinforced in Dominican Republic? Management or the existing regulatory scheme, and how? This is from Catherine Rojas.
Can you, could you please, I couldn't hear clearly, so.
Yeah, it's, what do you think should be reinforced in the Dominican Republic? Management or the existing regulatory scheme, and how?
Well, reinforce, I think, management is a huge issue right now in the Dominican Republic. I think that maybe throughout the whole conversation, it is clear that we are using a outdated regulatory scheme. We need to work on that, and we need to be able to come out with management of our resources. We're not managing anything right now. That's what it is, and so we need to come out with some sort of a regulation that take care of that. And then, you know, new technologies, probably, you know, being able to keep, like Professor Davis said, keep reminding the government, the authorities, that they have the final word on these resources. I mean, so we need to keep on working. We need to work on a more efficient regulatory scheme right now, as a whole, holistically.
Yeah, well, according to what we have all shared here, I will say, why do we have to make a choice? We can maybe reinforce regulation and also reinforce management after we have a solid regulation. Our next.
I'd like to say that's a very good lawyerly answer. Well done.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's a very good lawyer right there. But you know, Anderson, we don't even have any punishment for people, you know, because what we have is ridiculous up until now. So we have to adapt even that. We have to work on a holistic way on this, because you know, people is polluting water, and they are doing it for free because they can take away with that, and they don't have anything to pay. It doesn't cost them anything. So, you know, from my point of view, I don't know, Yomayra, but from my point of view, we need to work on everything right now. We don't have to, we don't have the luxury to make a choice.
As we all have agreed before, the data is crucial for us in order to have a good regulation, because as you say, we are not managing anything at all right now. But my main concern right now is quality regarding the discharge control in our coastal areas. That's a national problem, and all type of stakeholders are doing the wrong practices because they don't have the surveillance of the administration, or they don't have even the awareness how to do it properly. So for me right now, even before the law, we need to work on the management of quality control of the water discharge into our water resources.
Infrastructures, we are, I mean, we have the whole field to work on it. I mean, if you think about it, you know, we need to work on infrastructures too. There's hardly anything.
Sludges, for example, we don't have a landfill appropriated to do the right management of sludges. I don't know how you're doing right now at New Orleans. Maybe you have some brilliant ideas to us that we can maybe adapt.
We solved everything. We solved everything.
Yeah, Professor, you have the dead zone right there, so you know.
We just forgot to tell anyone. I think, I mean, where we find a lot of our work is actually going back almost to first principles, because, you know, right now we still have way too much pollution in the Mississippi River. And we know that that is causing dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico. We know that it's affecting wildlife and fisheries. We know that it's affecting, you know, coastal communities. And we know it's getting worse. And we know that the current, quote, legal regime, regulatory regime, isn't doing anything about it. One of the things that we're looking at, and we're doing this actually in conjunction with state government at this point, is just because it's not in a statute doesn't mean you don't have a right. I mean, one of the things we all inherited, you know, was riparian law, which essentially says people who own property along a stream have rights of usage. And basically you're not allowed to screw up that resource for someone downstream unreasonably. And even if that means, you don't have environmental, laws, there may be someone, it can be a community. It can be someone who can speak for the community. I don't know what Dominican law is about rights of nature, but who can speak for those? That there may be a way to, again, use, or the original principles that that govern the publicness of water, and that no one is allowed to make it, unreasonably unusable. So, at one time, at least under common law, that was called the natural flow doctrine. Now, you wouldn't have had the Industrial Revolution with that, but the idea is that you owe your neighbor a usable stream. And that, to me, is one of the things you might want to look at, because we're finding that Louisiana is having to go back and say, well, do we have rights? Could we go upstream? Can we talk to other states? Can we talk to the federal government? And can we make them listen? Because if you don't have rights, you don't necessarily have remedies. And that's why I think it's really important to think through, what rights you already have. So, I mean, when we look at like rewriting the Louisiana water law, the first thing we have to think about is what don't we want to give up? What's already there that works? And how do we make sure we stick with that? And how do we make sure we keep with things that people are familiar with so it doesn't look like a wholesale change? But that, to me, is looking for ways of making important decisions someone's job and enforceable is going to be, I think if there's one lesson that we're learning, that's it.
Well, I'm gonna pass, thank you very much. I'm gonna pass to this next question, which is very related to a very pressing concern now in the political context in the Dominican Republic with the new government. And it's related to privatization. And here, Jacqueline Altagracia is asking, what do you think about the private sector participation in the provision of water services and sanitation? Professor Davis is laughing already. It's like if he knew I'm looking at him.
Well, I'm looking at you, Chris. What? Yeah.
Sure. Can the private sector play a role? Yeah, of course. But I think, especially if you're talking about when we were talking about the spread between local and national, that stuff like sanitation and that stuff like water, sewage and water. For that to be done best, it seems to work best when it's at the local level, and it works best at the local level. I think, and I don't have statistics or studies to back any of this up. This is just my impression, but when the people who are bringing those services and sanitation to a community are in that community and only have to answer to that community, to me, that strikes me as a better situation than they might be in that community and they might be from that community, but they're answering to shareholders or they're answering to headquarters that's in France or wherever else. That strikes me as less of a good situation.
I totally agree with Chris. I think, if privatization allows you to take advantage of expertise and efficiencies, that's one thing. But if you're turning over the value of the water itself, that's another. And let's face it, I mean, all you have to do is look at, a bottle of, Dasani water in this country, which is tap water. I mean, somebody is paying for that through their local, water bills. They fill a plastic bottle and they sell it for like hundreds of times more. And those are the kinds of things that some things will happen. They're going to happen. But when you make that entire idea, the desired outcome, well, then you're going to see in all likelihood, disinvestment in the water resources because they will be viewed as essentially a business cycle investment. And so I would very much, make sure, again, I agree with Chris, you have to make sure that there is local accountability to the locals. And the primary function of the service is service to them. Otherwise, again, you're just selling, you're effectively selling raw water, which at least under our shared common legal traditions, isn't there to be sold.
Well, now we're going back to transboundary waters with the next question. Persis Ramirez says, as we know, the Dominican Republic and Haiti share 3 basins, which implies that these 2 countries might be the only 2 in the Greater Antilles to implement transboundary cooperation if they are to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 651. That was very specific. How would you recommend this cooperation be approached, considering the relationship between both countries is oftentimes stressed? Professor Martinó?
I think maybe we should redesign the approach, maybe not at the governmental or institutional level, but at the social level. We have a high immigration rate of our neighbors, right? And that's one of the main challenges in the border. For example, the challenge of reforestation. We have an agreement with the government of Haiti signed probably 5 years ago or more to recover all the transboundary stewardship. But right now, the works related to that topic are really on pause. We haven't been a forest percentage increasing within the framework of that agreement, but definitely we need to work at the social awareness level with maybe the NGOs of that area, international cooperation as donors. They work in the border to certain topics as, for example, energy access. So we should maybe learn from the energy access de los logros, right? De los logros, the energy access that we have had in that area, and maybe try to promote the same scheme, the same framework with the water access. One of the main things is the carbon, right? The coal, pardon me, ¿cómo se llama, Ramón, la quema de árboles para cocina stove? Es carbón,
Charcoal.
no, pardon me?
Charcoal.
Thank you, charcoal. That's one of our main problems right now regarding the border and water access, because they're cutting all the trees to feed their families. So at the social level, we need to do a huge intervention in order to have maybe a better water management with authorities.
Yeah. I'm happy to say I have no idea what the answer to this question is. But I would suggest, I mean, there is one other island with shared governance, and that's St. Martin, San Martin. And I don't know, how they do it. But looking for examples elsewhere is always a good way of starting, a project of that sort. So yeah. And also think of the role of NGOs. I mean, I think, the things that Professor Martin just said, the role that NGOs have played, like in rainforest preservation, or in balancing development pressures in the Galapagos and places like that. I think that they've been an essential player. They not only bring a degree of oversight, but they can bring resources that otherwise are not there. But you have to be sure that you're not turning the keys over to them either. I mean, making sure that all these people you're inviting in to be participants, are not there to tell you what to do, but to help you figure out what to do.
Well,
thank you.
We have, I don't know, maybe going back to an answer that Professor Davis provided before, we need to kind of I mean, it was Chris, I think.
Yeah, not me. It wasn't me.
That we were needing to start a conversation, at least to start it. It is. I cannot agree more about that. We have very different situations, very differentiated situation. Like 60% of Haiti general population is living below the poverty line, and out of that, 50% of the population, only 50% of the population has access to drinking water. So that tells you that their situation, especially after the hurricane and all that, that's a very very difficult situation. Just like Yomayra point out, you know, when you have a community basically devastating the natural resources, but in order to feed their families, you have to be very careful with that. I mean, we have to kind of find a balanced conversation with the neighbors. Maybe, you know, taking into consideration that it is an unavoidable conversation. Yes, they have their own situation, but we can go through. I mean, we're gonna go through that. We share the land, and it is and that's why we have to have that conversation.
Well, I don't think you can manage water or any other important natural resource without thinking in terms of, you know, poverty and equity. And that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, you can always say, well, where do we want to be 50 years from now? But when you're talking to people for whom next week is an eternity away, you know, from a planning standpoint, you have to acknowledge that. It doesn't mean you don't find a way to do it. But we exploit natural resources for a whole host of reasons, some which are greed and some are because of necessity. And I think that we have to be aware of which is which. And that's when I do think that you don't manage water in the abstract. You manage it as we encounter it as people.
Thank you. I'm gonna try to summarize Andy Hackett's question. He is asking on if we have in the Dominican Republic the best regulation and we follow the best policy, is the social political climate such that anything can actually be implemented in the Dominican Republic? So he's going for the social political factor of water law regulation.
Well, before you get into the specific situation in the DR, I will say this is the kind of question that we come up with against a lot here too. It's not just there, and we certainly come up against it right now with the current administration in the United States. And you're right. It's great to talk about laws and its policies and all this stuff, but eventually you reach the point where it just becomes about civics, and it becomes about organizing, and it becomes about making if the most of the people know that these or believe that these laws and policies are worthwhile, then you just have to step beyond it and go into the civics and go into the organizing and making that majority heard. That's very non-civic. That's just a general thing that is completely divorced from the situation on the ground in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, I think maybe Professor Martinó has an idea on the political climate and how it can impact the water regulation. I don't know if it's a favorable one or a challenging one. What do you think, Professor?
As you may know, we are very creative, right? And we have done pretty much everything without success. For example, we have a water table, which is working on the national water policy and the national water strategy, and we haven't seen yet. They're working on it. They have done public consultation, expert consultation, and that's one of the main tasks that we're pending right now, because that may help to organize the sector. Meanwhile, the Congress get together the law, right? So if you have a clear stakeholder map, a clear institutionality from the point of view of main orientations of how you're gonna manage water or what you wanna do with water in the short term, because we are less than 10 years to accomplish with the Sustainable Development Goals, but also with our own national strategy. And as I have said before, in both regulations, you have water tiers, water goals related to it. So maybe with a simple water policy, we can cover the nexus with agriculture, the nexus with energy, the climate change challenges related water. For example, before of this storm, we passed more than a year with a huge drought. So those are the topics that you can maybe solve. Meanwhile, the Congress get together their ideas for the project of law that has been there since 10 years ago or more.
The problem we face, Yomayra, is that we don't want to, like you said, we are very, let's say, resourceful, and but with water, it looks like we don't want to, because even with this project of law of regulation, we keep on bringing year and year the same project with no changes, no adaptation to new realities. I mean, it is no, I cannot understand how this project is still being presented in Congress since 2003, the same project, no changes, and it's not the same reality anymore. We cannot keep on pounding in the same rock thinking that we're gonna get something different.
Yep, definitely. We are running to our last two questions, at least in the chat. This one is, are international standards efficient on water management?
No.
Short answer. No.
The answer is no. Well, first of all, international standards are not rooted in local needs and local realities. They're good reference points, but Chris and I spend a whole lot of time looking at model legislation and the experience of people elsewhere, but they don't. There's no one else that we have found that has the situation, the resources, the problems, the culture, the opportunities that we have. And those are the things you want to make sure that you're referencing. And so useful, yes. Adequate, no.
Thank you. Well, we are arriving to our last question in the chat. I remind you all that you can always raise your hand if you want to say, stop, I want to say something. Well, I think this is very good to close with, because it says, for you, what are the main steps that we can take as citizens or as a professional in the area to promote this legal regulation for water and the correct public management? There are a couple of questions in that one. What are the main approaches to delimit their uses, from human consumption to introduction of water laws, daily home uses, agriculture, protection of the areas with the greatest concentration of water resources, etc.? So it's what can we do, and then how we delimit. I guess that one is connected a little bit to the scope of the law again.
Look, as citizens, we just have to be watchful. I think about empowering. We cannot be giving the back to the issue. We have a situation with water. The fate of our water is our fate. So, if we get involved in some menial things, why don't get involved with water? I mean, So that's a citizen, I think that's what we have to do. You know, go to the Congress and see what's going on with the law, with the regulation, find out and put our hands on it too. Because it's at the end, it's, you know, it's what we want is that the government ensure water for everyone, manage the resource accordingly, you know, don't give up our rights. So.
But our duties as well.
Yes, yes.
As a citizen, beyond to get involved, you also need to get informed of what to do. How is your family managing water? How is your building managing water, your community, and how you can help to increase the awareness, to work on the water consciousness that we need to have in order to appreciate more the water resources we have, and to require an efficient management and a better regulation from our politicians.
That makes perfect sense. The one thing I would add is that, because the question talks about where does things like the legal profession fit in, we find that, you know, if you waiting until the legislature or whatever governing body can write a law, you're asking a lot, because they don't know what to write. They've not been thinking about it generally. So, you know, I would suggest that in addition to civics from the sort of the community activism route, seeing what the legal profession and can do to help inform you. If somebody wants to know what you can do to improve water law, it's helpful if you can say, well, here are some ideas that have worked elsewhere or that we think would be worth pioneering here. That's really what Chris and I, that's pretty much our job. You know, we don't know what water law ought to be, but we have a real good idea what it ought not be. And we know that the state of Louisiana is going to need a new set of water laws, but they don't know it yet. You know, the governor doesn't really know it. Most of the members of the legislature don't know it. And when they do find they need it, they're not going to have the time to think about it. This is sort of like planning, what should you do to plan for a hurricane? Well, the time to plan for a hurricane is before it is upon you, because there's not much you can do in that moment to really reduce your risk. So I would suggest, thinking, and that's the only thing I've seen that's really worked, is when you not only, say I'm frustrated and angry, but where you say, and I have an idea. And you start trying to organize people around the idea as opposed to around what they're against. And I mean, if you guys wanted to look over our shoulders as we develop our water code stuff, we welcome it. You know us, you know what we can and can't do, but we think that's probably one of the, it sounds like a fair expectation of us. We share enough in the way of experiences and traditions and needs that you don't have to start from nowhere. So if you can marry kind of community action with professional expertise and create alternatives, then I think there's a better chance that you can get where you want to go.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, can I go?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. No, I just kind of, I would say, because not everybody, and I'm going to assume not everybody who's on this call or watching this works in water, would consider themselves a water lawyer. Not very few of us are that lucky, but you can educate yourself about water and all of the different ways that water affects these things. And you can educate yourself about something like circular economy, like Yomayra was talking about. And in your own profession, and in your own work, your own corner of the law, you'll find ways that you intersect with water and with you know, what, and this question from Claudia, she went into all these different, you know, aspects of water and all these things that it touches. You know, if you work for a company and you've got a business, you've got a project, and, you know, rather than the question that you maybe don't have to answer because there isn't a regulatory scheme or because, like what Ramon was saying, there's no fine or anything like that. But let's think about, you know, what is it going to do to water? What is it going to do to water pollution? What is it going to do to interfering with groundwater absorption? Stuff like that. You know, it is something because water touches so many aspects of our lives. There's a really good chance it touches your professional life as well.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's already touching mine with this panel. Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to point out a message I received from Andy Hackett. He just said that the cross-border cooperation agreement Cuenca Artibonite has been a good working model. He is referring to cooperation between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. I don't know the content of this cooperation agreement, and I would love if he could take the floor and speak a little bit about it. But I think he's a little bit shy because he's writing a lot and not asking for the word. And as I said, people, you are free here to talk. There's also a mention from Ojilve Medrano. I really hope I'm pronouncing your name well. He said that maybe Caribbean or tropical standard efficient on water management. Maybe if we have a little bit, it's still international, but maybe at a regional level standards, it will be helpful. He says, first, there is aplatanarlo, hay que aplatanarlo. It's making with plantain in the Dominican Republic. So that's a good point. Well, if you don't want to give some final words, I guess it's a wrap up, and then we can see with the Forum Q. Also, you know, we're very thankful for you to agree and to share with us your expertise. I know some of the questions were like, oh, what's the Institute think about what's an effective law? And I was just thinking, these people have been studying this for a year and you want them to answer in 5 minutes how to make a very effective law regulation. So thank you very much. Thank you for the insightful questions and interventions. On behalf of my board, the board of directors of COLADIC Dominican Republic, I thank these distinguished speakers, Professor Mark Davis, Christopher Dalbom, Yomayra Martinó, who is our member, almost 20 years member with us, and Professor Ramón Lantigua. Thank you so much for not just being here, but also encouraging to have this talk and have the initiative, right, to have this topic. In general, we thank you all very much for showing your interest in being part of this roundtable and for your constant support to the activities of COLADIC Dominican Republic. We are happy to announce that in due time, we will be sharing a formal document in English and Spanish containing the reasonings and conclusions that we have expressed, that have been expressed by our experts. This video is already available on YouTube. It's gonna be saved there. So if you want to rewatch it or just take pictures of your own station, it would be great. I think the point of all of this is that we can actually share knowledge, and especially in the Dominican Republic, when we are debating this topic or not really paying so much attention, we can actually reach the authorities. And if you people, if you know a congressman, we are here happy to have received the support of Congressman Jose Horacio Rodriguez, as well as the Vice Minister from the Ministry of Natural Resources in the Dominican Republic for international cooperation, Milagros de Camps. So if you can talk with more people, more authorities, I think we can, that's part of the role that we can do and how we can engage with this topic. So thank you very much, all of you. And we really hope to be in touch with GreEnergy Dominican Republic and also the Tulane Institute. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Have a good evening.
You too.